Hi, my name is Dr Natalie Wright and I'm a senior lecturer in the School of Architecture and Built Environment, Faculty of Engineering at QUT. In this module, I'm going to be talking about the second and third phases of the design thinking process. So I'll just share my screen now. And recapping on the last two modules, in module 1, you would have learnt about the design thinking process and in particular the D-School process, which we're using in this training program. And also some of the design thinking skills and mindsets that you need to develop as part of this thinking process. In module 2, I talked about empathizing, which is the first phase of the design process, where you're really learning about the users and your audience in regards to your design problem. You'll see there that the define and ideate are the next two phases. In defining, you sharpen those key questions. And in the ideate phase, you then brainstorm and create the solutions to the problem that you define. So in the define phase, this is really where you're framing and reframing the challenge. So you're sharpening the key questions that you're going to use to provoke the ideation of ideas to solve that problem. So within this phase, it's really important that you are defining the objectives of what you want your team to do and defining the roles that everyone will play in this design process. It's also important that you are coming together and sharing the captured data that you retained in the empathize phase and really starting to come together to share the insights, reveal the insights that are important and that people really want to pursue. And then making some decisions about what you're going to do within your design project. And then scoping that design challenge in order for you to come up with those solutions. So important to, again, highlight that it's really important for you to become comfortable with being uncomfortable. This diagram by Daniel Newman really highlights that first phase is quite messy. You don't know where you're going. And then as you go through the design process, you are honing and refining that, coming to that design solution and implementation. And in the define phase, we're in that second half of the first diamond. So we're really utilising convergent thinking. So making use of those left brain thinkers who are great at making decisions, making sense of things, clustering and creating hierarchies, and refining those ideas down to something that you might be able to play with. And again, reiterating that the process is not linear. So you'll see in this diagram that while defining is usually coming after you've empathized with your users, you might also need to go back to the define phase after you've tested some solutions with users and it needs more refining. So, you know, this is potentially not the only time that you will define. And this phase also requires the design thinking skills of research analysis and synthesis, and also bringing in those visualization tools again. So visualization being a key skill that you need as a design thinker in each phase. As I mentioned in module 2, visual mapping and spatial diagramming are great tools that make information easier to understand and sometimes reveal patterns and connections that we don't see when we're talking about these procedures and experiences. Tools such as mind mapping are also really helpful. So you're really analysing the information you've collected and the relationship from that data collection. That can be useful in a lot of the different phases of the design thinking process, but can highlight real affinities and connections that get you started to define that information down to a question that you can solve. And within every phase of the design process, it's important that you're coming back to your team, sharing the insights, particularly in the define phase, but later perhaps in the ideate and prototyping phase, where you're collectively making conclusions about the evaluation of those ideas and those insights. There's a great tool in the design thinking toolbook that you can utilise for this. So after you've unpacked those empathy findings with your team and really decided on those key insights that are important to the project, you need to scope the design challenge. This is where you form the design brief for the project. And I think the key thing is then coming up with an actionable, unique problem statement, which is framed by your specific users. We call this a point of view statement. So this is really important because it provides boundaries for the project or the challenge without giving solutions. It's important that the point of view statement doesn't include solutions that you predetermined. It's also important that you're thinking about redesigning experiences, which is the verbs, and not the nouns, which are the solutions. Sometimes people jump the gun and are thinking before they scope the design challenge what the solution is, and it's really important not to do that, because you can come up with much more innovative ideas when you're open to receiving those ideas. And it's important to create design challenges that contain interesting things that we want to discover. So we all want to learn. We all want to learn things that then perhaps we might learn other things from. So we don't want to come up with a problem statement that we already know or we've already had experience with. And then from that, so in terms of the point of view statement, the best way to write that statement is using this template. So it's about describing the user who needs a way to, and then describing the need of that user, surprisingly because of but, and talking about the insight that you've had from the collection of your data. So the example on the left there, we met Michael, a free-spirited IWN bicyclist. We noticed he feels nostalgic for the open spaces of his youth, which is his need. And then insight is, we wonder if this means people who are inundated with technology crave an analogue experience. It would be game-changing to create escapes within an urban setting. And then from there, you can turn your point of view statement into an actionable provocation that launches into your ideation phase and the multiple ideas that you're going to generate in that phase. So how might we question needs to be not too broad, not too specific. It needs to be ambitious but achievable. So an example of that on the right is, how might we redesign ice cream to be more portable? Is a great how might we question. If it was too narrow, it might look like, how might we create a cone to eat ice cream without dripping? Too specific. And if it was too broad, it might look like, how might we redesign dessert? Which really doesn't give you the constraints that you need to solve the problem with some really innovative solutions. So why is it called a how might we question? Well, the how really promotes this sense of creative optimism. It really opens up or makes us feel as if there's a lot of different ways that we can solve this problem and that we need to be optimistic about it. The might removes the expectation of perfection and really promotes that open-ended thinking. And the we promotes collaboration and the idea of building on each other's ideas. So this how might we question really, I guess, mobilizes people into action so that we might come up with a statement in healthcare such as, how might we transform the moment of diagnosis so that the patient feels empowered to tackle their new normal? So in order to frame that how might we statement, I'm using the design project scoping guide, which was developed by Thomas Both from the D School. And this is a great way of breaking down the problem so that you can then form that how might we question. So we want to look at the what. So what is the challenge space or experience you're trying to affect? For whom are you designing? And then the context. What are the known insights that set the context and explain the importance of the challenge? Additionally, we need to consider the design team's considerations. So we're looking at what are we trying to get done? What are the goals of the team in this challenge? And what are the assumptions of our team members? Where do we need to check ourselves? So if we break that down into the various statements, and it's great to write these down so that you can really unpack the statements and then form them into the question. The what, so redesign the what experience, and that might look like, as an example, redesign the in-store sunglasses buying experience. Obviously, this is a retail example, not a health example. For whom? So for what user group, while considering other stakeholders, that statement may look like, for a retail example, for fashion conscious women who update their style often, while considering sales clerks and what part they might play. Thirdly, the context. So in a world where, or keeping in mind something, an example of this might be keeping in mind we've learned that physically trying on the glasses, an advantage over online buying, is hugely important to people. That's your insight from the data that you've collected. In terms of the team's goals, we aim to, in the project, so example, we aim to create new interactions, campaigns, and or space for buying glasses in our stores. By the end of this project, we want to implement one solution in one of our stores. Very clear goals. And assumption-wise, we need to test the assumptions that, so example, we need to test the assumption that customers have trouble finding and deciding on the right style of glasses. So once you've written down all the answers to those questions, you can form that how might we question. And that's then going to give you a great pivot point to then generate some solutions in the ideate phase. So the ideate phase is all about generating radical alternatives to tackle unmet needs. We need to think about brainstorming, the sharing of ideas, divergent and convergent thinking, yes and thinking, where you're building on the ideas of others and refining as you go, and synthesizing and prioritizing ideas for then turning that idea into a prototype that you might test with your users in the following phase. So Ideate is all about the process of exploring both a large quantity and a broad diversity of ideas And it's really only when you've got that vast repository of ideas that you can be quite choosy in building the prototypes that you want to test with your users. We go back to the double diamond, and we're now in that second diamond, first phase, where we're using divergent thinking again. So that creative thinking, right brain thinking, really building ideas, generating ideas and possibilities, and really exploring innovation. And then we're going to go back to convergent thinking when we need to synthesize some of those ideas into one that we might test as part of the prototyping phase. Again, the process is not linear, and while ideation often comes after defining, we may need to go back to ideation phase after we've tested prototypes with our users, or where we see that there's gaps in our thinking. And in this phase, we're really tapping into our visualization skills, brainstorming. We're doing some prototyping while we're thinking and ideating to refine some of those ideas. And we're really drawing on our persistence, our resilience, our adaptability, and our risk-taking roles here in terms of opening ourselves up to really get wild and innovative ideas that we can bring back to something that's going to work. It's really important to also utilize moonshot thinking within your teams. So aiming to achieve something that we all think is probably going to be impossible, because it's much easier to make something 10 times better than it is to make something 10% better. So really reaching for the sky and motivating our teams to think that anything is possible. Drawing on our sketching and sketchnoting tools here to really get the best outcomes. This video that I've noted at the bottom of the screen is a really handy one in understanding some of the things that you can do to develop your sketchnoting skills, which is going to help you in developing rapid ideas and communicating them to the rest of your team and to users. Brainstorming is a fundamental part of the ideation phase. And this is where you're really utilizing the skills of your team in rapid brain dumps. And it's also building that enthusiasm within your team to come up with awesome ideas. We want quantity rather than quality here. So all ideas are welcome. No matter how you feel about any of these ideas, it's important to put them out there, capture every idea. And the way that you can do that is assigning a scribe to capture those ideas, or you can do individual brainstorming or group brainstorming via post-it notes. One of the things that I asked participants in the CEQ Fellows workshop to do was a post-it storm, and depending on the time frame you have available, that can be something like 30 ideas in 10 minutes or 101 ideas in 30 minutes. It's incredible to see how many ideas people can come up with when they're under pressure. So it's important to apply that pressure to your team when they're brainstorming. Another idea is creating volumes of ideas, but ensuring that people are coming up with really wild ideas as well as normal ideas. And so I use this activity, which asks participants to think about where these ideas sit in the idea spectrum and sort them as they're coming up with those ideas to maintain that you're ending up with some really great, amazing, wild ideas at the end of the day. And later, great activity is to get rid of all those easy doable ideas or practical ideas, and just stay with those long shot or delightful ideas, and perhaps combine some of those together, build on some of those long shot ideas in order to make them even better. Another technique is called Scamper. This is a lateral thinking technique that uses 7 words as prompts to challenge the status quo. So words such as substitute, combine, adapt, modify, put to another use, eliminate, or reverse can be applied to the current situation in order to generate new ideas about that situation. Another method is brainwriting, or the 635 method. This is really useful if you want to generate a lot of ideas quickly and further develop existing ideas. Good in a team that is a bit more reserved and likes structure. Essentially, this is 6 people in a team, each producing 3 ideas in the first round, and then in the next 5 subsequent rounds, those ideas are further developed by all the different participants. So in a matter of 30 minutes, you can collect, about 108 ideas. So it's a great quick way of ideating. Another technique is called Mashup, where you bring odd and unexpected things together to spark fresh ideas. So an example of this is where you might compare, say, a hotel experience with a hospital experience, and you ask people to list as many elements of each experience that they can in a time frame, like 2 minutes. So the hospital experience, number 1, the hotel experience, number 2. And then in the third column, you combine some of those items in the 2 different lists to come up with new products, services, or experiences. So you're effectively mashing up those elements to come up with a new experience or ideas for that experience. Role play is also another great technique, which can be aligned to, say, the 6 thinking hats idea by Edward de Bono. And this is where you're adopting the persona of a user in a scenario to get a better sense of how that person may think, what they might do, how they might feel, in order to make that idea better. So how would a 5-year-old solve this problem? How would Luke Skywalker do it? So you can attribute a lot of different personas in this activity to really generate some awesome ideas. Body storming is a similar technique whereby you imitate a scenario in the relevant environment using the artifacts that they would normally use and the people that would be involved to test some ideas as closely as possible. So great to refine your ideas. This particular photo is one that I took in the CEQ Fellows workshop, second workshop, in which these participants were prototyping an idea using body storming. So it can be used in different phases of the design process to really refine some of those ideas. Powers of 10 is another technique where you consider increasing or decreasing magnitudes of context as constraints to reframe and reveal insights into that idea. So, for example, what if it took more than 4 hours to complete the experience? What if it took less than 30 seconds? And that can give you real insight into how that idea might function so that you can further refine it. Storyboarding is another technique, great where you need to show or plan the interaction of a product or service with the people that are going to use it. And you can really think about the emotions, the motivations and the feelings that people are going to have while experiencing that product or service. And then once those ideas are collected, we need to harvest those ideas. So we can't use all of them. So we need to generate them, structure them in a way that we can then converge them to selection of a couple of ideas, and then refine them and document them so you can actually have something to compare and make decisions around. So some of the techniques for that selection process: dot voting, which I've already shown some examples of in Module 2. This is a great way of making really quick decisions where it's involving all of the team or all of the stakeholders if you want to involve them in that process. And then synthesizing the ideas in a way that you might then be able to compare them and make some decisions about what you might move forward with. So I use this technique called Newsflash, in which you really have to think about the core of the idea and the points that make that idea awesome, much like a newspaper headline. So you have your headline at the top with a few dot points that describe the beauty of that idea, and then a visualization to really capture the important elements of that idea so that you might be able to gain some conclusions from that within your team. 2x2 matrix is also a great way to categorize and prioritize ideas, and often see patterns and opportunities that you might not think about if you get quite wedded to one idea. In the Heal Connecting Rehab Services across West Moreton project, Evonne used this technique to ask the team if they had any myths, hopes, fears and taboos about this particular idea that had been developed. And in this way, you're starting to gain insight from different people's perspective about how that idea might be refined, so that you're, I guess, getting rid of some of those things that might be deterrents for people accepting that idea when you test it. She did that with post-it notes and dot voting, which really helped to, I guess, highlight some of those really important things that needed to be thought about within that idea from both a staff and a patient perspective. NABC, needs, approach, benefit and competition, is also a great way of capturing the core of an idea and sharing it and comparing it with others in a really targeted way. So another great way to kind of put a series of ideas up to show people to then get some ideas as to what should move forward for prototyping. Some other ideas for ideation is analogies and benchmarking. So sometimes we can find inspiration for ideas and approaches by exploring different worlds, which is similar to the Mashup idea. And so this example is, we're looking at innovating a shoe. The pain point that has been identified as an insight is low status for that particular shoe. So if we look at another product that thinks about status, we can start collecting some different ideas about that different world that might apply back to improving the low status of that shoe. In the ideation phase, it's really important, and we do this a lot in interior design, is creating a concept. So moving from just a handful of ideas and insights into a concept that really resonates with the design team, and also hopefully will resonate with the client or the users, and refining that concept to really push it forward to be quite a strong theme that that puts people on the journey of this story that you're trying to tell as part of the experience. So an example of this was the Heal PICU partnership project, which I discussed in Module 2. In that project, we were looking at a particular floor of the Queensland Children's Hospital, which was organised into rooms called the Riverside Rooms and the Hillside Rooms, with the foyer being this central space that then allowed people to either go into the Riverside or Hillside Rooms. So we really saw that foyer space as an important space that connected both patients from both sides and the families of those patients on both sides, to then potentially create this space where they came together in a town square type scenario. So we called that foyer the village. And we also thought of the project because we were looking at family-centred care, and that there's so many people involved in healing the children in that particular unit. We thought of the proverb, it takes a village to raise a child. So that idea of the central village became a pivotal idea that really resonated with staff in particular. And we used a number of ways to test whether that was the right social area to have a village where parents and staff could come together to discuss the healing of their children. And interestingly, that concept was taken further by staff in their assessment of how they do their meetings. They wanted to have their meetings in the village. They wanted to have them much more exposed so that the family-centred care concept was taken to that next level. And that was a great success of that concept. Really important that when we're ideating, we're using design thinking at the forefront, but we're also doing that alongside systems thinking. So while it's important to have those right brain thinkers in the team that are thinking about that intuition, that emotion, it's also important that we come up with those ideas, but then we also ask our left brain thinkers and bring them into the conversation so that our ideas can be really refined to make sure that they actually work. So on reflection of this module, I wanted you to have a think about how you might iterate ideas and refine and improve them in your healthcare scenario. Having worked with a lot of educators around design thinking, a lot of students around design thinking, many times people come up with one idea and then because they're quite close to that idea, they're very hesitant to let it go and to build on that idea. So it's important when we are doing this iteration phase that we're not getting too emotionally connected to the point that we're not actually refining those ideas and making them better constantly. Design is an ever-changing process. I also want you to think about how you can foster environments that give rise to more creativity and serious play in your organisation, because the success of the ideation phase is going to be the fact that people are not scared to put up ideas. They are happy to be risk takers. They're not going to be rebuked if they come up with ideas that are not something that would be the expected idea. So important to foster that kind of environment in your organisation, because that's going to help you innovate much better for your healthcare environments. And then also, how can you foster radical collaboration within your organisation for ideation? So again, it's that fostering that culture of risk-taking, that culture of not taking yourself too seriously, coming back to being that, having that beginner's mindset. So it would be interesting to hear your thoughts about how you see that happening in your organisation. I also invite you again to look at the resources in the presenters resources and readings document that we provided as part of this training module, and also encourage you to develop some of these tools and learn about more tools that are relevant to the define and ideate phases in the design process. The next module is going to talk about how you take these wonderful ideas and prototype them in order to test them with your users.